The alien princess challenged him for fun and faced a living legend. The proximity alarm on the bridge of the ISV Greywall was not supposed to go off in the Kree neutral corridor. Nothing happened in the neutral corridor. That was the whole point of it. 30 years of Treaty Inc. had made this stretch of space the most aggressively boring lane in the known galaxy. And for the past 4 years I had been hauling processed titanium ore in colony supply crates through it without a single incident worth writing home about. I was fine with that. I was more than fine with that. The alarm went off anyway. Captain Cole, my navigator, a young man named Owen Price, called from his station. He was 23 years old and had never seen combat. I had hired him specifically because of that. We have a vessel closing from the port quarter. Dominion Registry, luxury class. I sat down my coffee, real coffee, not the synthetic paste that most freighter crews drank, and walked to the main display. The ship resolving on the scanner was enormous, not warship enormous, but the kind of enormous that came from waste, from excess, from the particular joy that the Kree Dominion took in reminding everyone else in the galaxy that they could afford to build things bigger than they needed to be. It was a personal cruiser, the kind of vessel that only Kree nobility operated. Long, white, and curved like a blade left to soften in warm water, it moved through space with a slowness that was itself a statement. We do not hurry for anyone. They're signaling us, Owen said. I know. I sat down in the captain's chair and straightened my jacket. Put them through. The face that appeared on the view screen was not what I expected. I had dealt with Kree communications officers before. Tall, blue-skinned, formal to the point of rigidity, with those wide, amber eyes that always seemed to be looking slightly past you rather than at you. This was a communications officer, yes, but young. And behind her, I could see what looked like a party in progress. Soft light, music that did not translate well through the audio filters, and the movement of many elegant bodies. Freight vessel, the officer said in the clipped tone of someone who has been briefly interrupted from something more interesting. You are occupying a gravitational lane that has been reserved for the personal transit of the Lady Serraine Velrathan, third daughter of the High House Drathan, heir to the Velkarth seat of Kree. You will adjust your heading by 7 degrees and reduce speed to allow safe passage. I looked at Owen. He looked at me. 7 degrees would add 3 hours to our transit. 3 hours meant a penalty from the colony station we were supplying because their loading window was tight, and they charged by the minute for overruns. But this was the neutral corridor, and this was Kree base. And the thing about operating in someone else's territory, the thing I had learned in the years before I became a freighter captain, was that the smart play was almost always to be invisible. Understood, I said, adjusting heading now. The officer nodded without really acknowledging me and cut the channel. The cruiser swept past us like a white comet, leaving a wake of displaced energy that made the gray wall shudder slightly. Owen ran a stabilization correction and muttered something under his breath that I pretended not to hear. Log the course deviation, I told him. Well, claim the delay penalty from the transit authority. It won't cover the colony surcharge, but it'll cover half. Yes, sir. He paused. Do you want to know who she is, the princess? I mean, I just pulled her public record while you were talking to them. Not particularly. She's young, 22 by Kree standard years. That's about 30 in ours. She's apparently well-known in Dominion social circles for being, and I'm quoting the public record here, unusually curious about non-ref species. She's visited 4 human colony stations in the past 2 years. I looked up from the navigation display. Tourism. Apparently she finds humans interesting. He said it the way you would say that someone finds insects interesting. Not cry, just with a certain mild bewilderment. Wonderful, I said, and went back to my coffee. That should have been the end of it. It never is, though, is it? The moments that change everything almost never feel like they're doing it while they happen. They feel like minor inconveniences. They feel like proximity alarms and course deviations and 3 extra hours on a supply run. It was 40 minutes later when the second signal came in. This time the face on the view screen was different. Older Kree officer, more formal with the kind of uniform that existed purely to communicate authority. He looked at me the way someone looks at an interesting piece of furniture that is unexpectedly spoken. "Captain of the freight vessel," he said, "you are requested to receive a personal communication from the Lady Serraine Velrathan." I sat up a little straighter. "Requested?" "Yes. What does she want?" He looked briefly pained by the directness of the question. "She will communicate that herself." "Will you receive?" I considered it for exactly as long as it took me to remember that refusing a Cree noble's personal communication in their own territory was the kind of thing that got trade licenses suspended and added names to informal blacklists that the Dominion Merchant Authority claimed did not exist, but absolutely did. "I'll receive," I said. What appeared on the screen then was not what I expected at all. Serraine Velrathan was tall as all Cree were, but she moved to the camera with a lightness that suggested something beyond the usual aristocratic poise. Her skin was a deep blue, almost violet in the cruiser's warm lighting, and her amber eyes had a sharpness in them that was immediately different from the polished blankness I was used to seeing in Dominion nobility. She was wearing something that looked expensive in the abstract way that things look expensive when you are not sure exactly what you are looking at, but she had clearly pushed the formality of it aside. Her hair, dark and pinned in a way that was probably ceremonially significant, had several strands escaping near her face, and she had not bothered to fix them. She looked at me with undisguised curiosity. The way a child looks at something new and interesting and does not yet know that staring is considered rude. "You are the captain," she said. It was not a question. "Ethan Cole." "Yes, you gave way without an argument." She said it as though she was still working out how she felt about this. "Most human freighter captains argue. Not for long, but they argue. You gave way immediately." "You had priority," I said. "Yes." She tilted her head. "My people scanned your vessel when we passed. Standard procedure. But my communications officer noticed something unusual about your service record. She brought it to my attention." I kept my expression calm and pleasant and thought about all the reasons that sentence could be a problem. "I'm a licensed freight operator," I said. "ISV Greywall out of the Farron Colony Hub. We carry." "You are a retired military officer," she said, not interrupting exactly, but sliding past what I was saying with elegant ease. "Your military record is classified. That is unusual. Most retired freight captains who pass through the corridor have records that are either clean or carry minor administrative flags. A Tier 9 classification is quite rare." She paused. It made me curious. I decided in that moment to be honest, because the alternative was lying to a Cree noble in Cree space about a Tier 9 military record, and that particular combination of choices had a historical tendency to end badly. "I served in the war," I said. 15 years ago, I separated from service afterward. I've been in private freight for 4 years. "Which war?" she asked. There had only been one war between humanity and the Dominion, but I understood why she asked. From the Cree perspective, that conflict was one of several border disputes that had occurred in the past century. From my perspective, it was the thing I had spent 15 years not thinking about during the day and not managing to avoid thinking about at night. "The Kroth Campaign," I said. Something shifted in her expression. It was subtle, the way things are subtle on faces you are not yet practiced at reading. But it was there a small recalibration, like hearing a familiar word in an unfamiliar sentence. "I would like to meet you," she said, "in person. I'm on a delivery schedule." "I know. I have already communicated with the Farron Colony Station and arranged for your delivery window to be extended by 6 hours at my cost." She said this without any particular emphasis, the way you would mention that you had moved a chair to make more room. "There is a docking corridor available on the port side of my vessel. I will send you the approach coordinates." She waited. She was very good at waiting. It had the quality of patience that comes from never having had to be in a hurry. I thought about saying no. I turned the idea over in my mind and examined it from several angles. I could say no. I could cite regulations, of which there were several that could plausibly apply. I could be unavailable. I could malfunction, technically speaking, in ways that would delay docking for longer than 6 hours. But the thing about Tier 9 classifications was that they were supposed to keep this kind of conversation from happening in the first place. The fact that it was happening anyway meant that someone in the Dominion system had already flagged my name for possible follow-up, and the worst thing I could do now was make that flag interesting. I thought about all of this in about 4 seconds. "Send the coordinates," I said. Owen did not say anything when I told him we were docking. He pulled up the approach vector from the Dominion system, ran the standard pre-dock checks, and guided the gray wall into the designated corridor with the quiet competence that made him good at his job. He did not ask questions, which was another reason I had hired him. My chief mechanic, a woman named Claire Dutton, who had worked with me since my second year in freight, did ask a question. She appeared in the docking corridor while I was putting on my better jacket, the one without the engine grease on the left cuff, and leaned against the wall with her arms crossed. "Dominion nobility," she said. "Yes, personal invitation. Yes, Ethan." She said, my name the way people say a name when they want to say something more complicated than what they are about to say. "Is this about the record?" "Possibly. Do you want me to come with you?" I thought about it. Claire was capable and smart and had an instinct for trouble that had saved both of us from several poor decisions over the years. But she was also someone who knew enough about my past to accidentally say the wrong thing in the wrong moment. "No," I said, "I'll be fine." She looked at me for a long second. "You always say that and I'm always right." "You're usually right," she said. "There's a difference." I pulled on my jacket and checked my reflection in the small mirror beside the docking hatch. Average height, average build, brown hair going gray at the temples. A face that had been described by various people over the years as forgettable in the most specific way, which I had always taken as a compliment. Nothing about me looked like what I was. That was the idea. Docking connection sealed. The hatch opened. On the other side of the airlock, there was a Cree officer waiting in full formal dress, standing with the posture of someone who had been trained to stand in a particular way from childhood, and had never once considered that there might be other ways to stand. Behind him, the interior of the Dominion cruiser opened up like a museum that someone had decided to also party in. "Captain Cole," the officer said, "the Lady Serraine will receive you in the receiving hall. Please follow me." I followed him. The inside of the cruiser was everything the outside had promised. High ceilings that curved rather than met at angles because the Seraph found straight lines aesthetically depressing in enclosed spaces. Lighting that shifted slowly between warm amber and cool blue in a cycle that I had read was meant to replicate the natural light patterns of the Cree home world. And Kroth, a significant number of them, moving through the spaces with the unhurried ease of people who had nowhere more important to be and were content about it. They looked at me with curiosity as I passed, not hostility. Curiosity. The way people look at something they have heard about but never seen up close. One young noble standing near an archway with a drink in his hand actually leaned sideways slightly to watch me go past, as though the angle might reveal something he was missing. I kept my face neutral and my pace steady, and followed the officer through 2 more corridors and a set of doors that opened with a sound like water. The receiving hall was large, not as large as the training halls I had spent years in, but large enough that my first instinct was to assess sight lines and cover, which I suppressed immediately because that was a habit I had worked very hard to stop having. Serraine Velrathan was standing near a window that looked out over open space, holding a glass of something luminescent, talking to 2 other Cree who wore the expressions of people who are listening to someone they find genuinely entertaining. When I entered, she turned immediately. Her amber eyes caught the light. "Captain Cole," she said, and there was something in her voice that was different from the Vukreen version. More alive, more interested. "You came. You made it difficult to decline," I said. She smiled. It had the quality of most CFT smiles, which were wider at the corners than human smiles and showed slightly too many teeth to be entirely comfortable to receive, but it reached her eyes in a way that made it feel genuine regardless. "My people extended your delivery window," she said. That was the only pressure I applied. In Creeing, a delivery window is pressure. "You understand our culture," she said, sounding pleased. "Better than most humans who operate in this corridor." "I've been doing this for 4 years. "You have been doing this for 4 years, she agreed. "Before that, you were a commander in the United Earth Fleet. Before that, you graduated from the Fleet Academy with the 3rd highest strategic examination score in that year's class." She paused. The first and second highest both died during the war. That is in the public record. She had done research. Of course she had. I had about 40 minutes on the docking run over here, and she had clearly spent some of that time. The war ended a long time ago. I said it ended 15 years ago. She said you separated from service 9 months after the armistice. My records show you received 3 commendations and 2 formal citations in that same period, all of which you declined to attend in person. She tilted her head. My cultural advisor tells me that is unusual behavior for a human soldier. Your cultural advisor is right. Why did you decline them? I considered the question around us. The other Cree in the hall had not moved away exactly, but they had become quieter. The way people get quieter when a conversation becomes something they want to hear because commendations are for the people giving them. I said more than the people receiving them, and I had no interest in being useful to anyone for that particular purpose. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly as though I had answered a more complicated question than the one she had asked. I would like to offer you a formal challenge, she said. A shave. The room was quiet enough that I heard 3 separate people react to that small sounds, indrawn breath, the soft clink of a glass being set down carefully. I knew what a shaveth was. I had read about it years ago as part of a pre-employment cultural briefing, and I had updated that knowledge in the years since because knowing things about the people in whose territory you operate is simple professional sense. It was a challenge duel, ceremonial, structured, not lethal in its standard form. 3 rounds, unarmed combat, blade combat, and tactical simulation. It was also, in culture, the clearest possible way to say to someone, I think you might be worth my time. From a princess in her own hall with an audience, it was something more specific than that. It was the kind of invitation that could not be gracefully declined. I'm afraid, Captain, I said. You are a retired military officer with a Tier 9 classification, she said, still pleasant, still curious, still holding that luminescent drink as though we were discussing something of modest interest. I would like to know what that means. I suspect the most direct way to find out is to challenge you. I looked at her. She looked back at me. Around us, her court was doing the Cree equivalent of holding its breath. I thought about everything I had spent 15 years building. The quiet, the anonymity, the grease on Claire's overalls and Owen's steady hands on the navigation console, and the reliable boredom of the neutral corridor. I thought about what happened if I said no. I thought about what happened if I said yes. When? I asked. She smiled again, and this time it was wider. Tomorrow morning, she said, by your time cycle. I nodded once and the hall exhaled around me. In the corridor on the way back to my ship, walking behind the formal officer and past the curious eyes of Cree nobles, I had exactly one coherent thought. I had been doing so well. Owen Price was still at the navigation console when I got back to the gray wall. He had a mug of tea that had gone cold and a data pad open to something he was pretending to read. The moment I came through the docking hatch, he set the data pad down with the careful speed of someone who was absolutely not waiting up. Everything all right? He asked. Fine, I said. Right, he paused. Did you need me to do anything, file anything, change any schedules? No, go get some sleep. Yes, sir. Claire was waiting in the galley. She had made fresh coffee, real coffee, from the small sealed container she kept in her personal locker and only opened for occasions she considered significant. She had 2 mugs on the table and an expression that meant she had already started forming opinions about how this conversation was going to go. I sat down and took the mug she pushed toward me. She challenged you to a CHVET, Claire said. I looked at her. Owen may have been monitoring the communications, she said, at my request, for safety purposes. Monitoring my communications with a Dominion noble is a violation of the Corridor Treaty. And yet, she wrapped her hands around her own mug. She challenged you, yes, and you accepted. I did. Claire was quiet for a moment. She was not a quiet person by nature, which meant the quiet was doing work. Are you planning on losing on purpose? I drank some of the coffee. It was good. It was always good when Claire made it. The graceful thing would be to give a strong performance and fall short in the final round. Let her win the simulation. Walk away without anyone being too uncomfortable. That's the plan. That was the first plan. She looked at me steadily. And the second plan? I don't have a second plan yet. You always have a second plan. Not yet, I said. She accepted that in the way that Claire accepted most things, which was to continue looking at me until she had extracted something more. She pulled your record, your real record, the part of it that isn't classified, which is enough to know there is a classified part, and she wants to know what's in it. She's curious about humans, specifically about what humans are capable of. I set the mug down. She is 22 years old by reckoning, and she has never met a human warrior. She thinks this is going to be educati. Onal, Claire was quiet again for a longer moment this time. Then she said very carefully, "Is it going to be?" I looked at the table. Outside the porthole near the galley door, the slow curve of the Dominion cruiser was visible against the stars, white and vast and self-satisfied with its own existence. "I don't know yet," I said. "I'm going to sleep on it," she nodded. She did not say what I knew she was thinking, which was that sleeping on things had never once changed my nature. That the person I had been before 4 years of freight runs was still the person I was. No matter how many ore deliveries I filed and delivery penalties I disputed and quiet evenings I spent pretending the past was a different country. I went to my bunk. I lay there for 2 hours looking at the ceiling. The thing about the Shaveth was that it was not actually a test of fighting. Any species in this galaxy could fight. Several of them did it better than humans in raw physical terms. The Kree were faster. The Velshara were stronger. 3 separate species had skeletal structures that made unarmed combat so naturally effective that they had developed formal systems specifically to limit how much damage they were allowed to cause in social settings. The Chaveth was a test of something else. It was a test of how a being responded to pressure, to escalating stakes, to the psychological weight of losing ground slowly and still having to choose what to do next. Culture was built on the idea that how you fight tells you everything about who you are, how you move when you are tired, how you think when you are losing, whether you know the difference between a battle you can win and one you should concede. Serraine Velrathan had challenged me because she wanted to know what I was made of. I lay there on my bunk and thought about that. The problem was that I already knew what I was made of. I had spent 15 years trying to forget it. And the reason I was good at hauling freight was exactly the same reason I had been very good at the thing I did before. I paid attention. I planned for things that had not gone wrong yet. I was very comfortable with long periods of boredom, punctuated by moments that required everything I had. Freighter captains and warship commanders needed exactly the same qualities, just pointed in different directions. In the morning, I got up, ate breakfast, and told Claire and Owen that I would be aboard the Dominion cruiser for most of the day and that they should run the standard maintenance checks and stay on the ship. "Are you going to wear the good jacket?" Claire asked. "I'm already wearing it." "You're wearing your third best jacket. The good one is in your locker." I looked down at my jacket. She was right. "Fine," I said and went to change. The good jacket was navy blue and had been pressed at some point recently enough that it still held the creases. It had no insignia on it because I had removed all the insignia from everything I owned in the weeks after I separated from service, in the way that you remove a splinter carefully and with more relief than you expected to feel. Owen ran the docking connection when I was ready, and I walked back through the airlock into the Dominion cruiser. The same formal officer was waiting. He led me through the curving corridors again, past the slow-shifting light and the curious eyes. But this time, our destination was different. We went deeper into the ship, down a long corridor that opened into a space that was clearly designed for the specific purpose of what was about to happen. The arena was oval, maybe 40 m at its widest, with a floor of smooth, dark material that was not quite stone and not quite composite and absorbed light without reflecting it. Around the edges, arranged on tiered seating that curved up toward the ceiling, were Kree, many of them, far more than I had seen in the receiving hall. They were dressed for the occasion, which among Kroth meant formal wear, with small colored markers at the throat that indicated house allegiance and expected outcomes. I did not know enough about those specific markers to read them, but the overall impression was of people who had come to watch something they found entertaining. I was the entertainment. Serraine Velrathan was already in the arena. She had changed from the previous evening into something more functional, fitted, dark, with no decoration that could be grabbed or caught, and the kind of footwear that existed purely for grip and movement. She was speaking quietly with a small cluster of attendants who were clearly in the process of completing some final ceremonial preparation. When she saw me enter, she stepped away from them and crossed the arena floor to meet me. "Captain Cole," she said. "You look rested." "I slept well," I said, which was not entirely true but was close enough. "Good," she gestured at the space around us. "You understand the format. 3 rounds, unarmed combat, blade combat, and tactical simulation. Each round is complex in itself. There are forms to honor the beginning and end of each exchange. I've read about Chavith. Reading about it and experiencing it are different things." She said it without any particular weight as a simple observation. "Are you nervous?" The honest answer was no, which I recognized was itself the most alarming thing about the situation. I had been nervous at the delivery station last month when their loading arm had malfunctioned and come within 2 m of the Greywall's hull. I had been nervous 3 months ago when Claire found a stress fracture in the secondary cooling line. I was not nervous now, standing in an alien arena in front of several hundred Kree nobles who were about to watch their princess challenge a human freight captain. The part of me that should have been nervous had been trained out of a very long time ago. "A little," I said, which was the diplomatic answer. She smiled. "I'm also a little nervous. I think it will make this more interesting." An attendant appeared at her shoulder and spoke quietly in Kree formal register, which was fast and clipped in a way that I could follow only partially. Serene listened, nodded, and turned back to me. "We will begin in a few minutes. There is a customary address first." She paused. "I should tell you something, Captain. Go ahead. My Kurders have placed bets," she said, "on the outcome of each round. The odds being offered on you are very unfavorable. That's understandable." "I did not place a bet," she said. "I never do in a Shavith. It distorts your thinking." She looked at me steadily. "I want you to fight at your full ability, whatever that is. I'm not doing this to win. I am doing this to learn something." I looked at her for a long moment. There was something very genuine in her face behind the formality of it and the sharpness of the amber eyes. She meant exactly what she said. 22 years old and a product of every privilege her culture could provide. And she had enough self-awareness to know that winning a rigged contest was worth nothing. She reminded me in a way that was completely unexpected of the best young officers I had ever served with. "I understand," I said. "Good." She took a step back. "Then let us find out what your Tier 9 classification means." The attendant called the assembly to order in formal Kree, and the tiered seating quieted into the particular silence of an audience that has been waiting and is glad to stop waiting. Somewhere in the upper tiers, someone adjusted their seat and the small sound traveled perfectly in the shaped acoustics of the arena space. I rolled my shoulders once and settled my weight. The attendant finished speaking. Serene moved to the center of the arena floor. I moved to meet her. We stood 3 meters apart. She bowed in the seer formal style, a slight lowering of the head and the crossing of one hand over the opposite shoulder. I returned it with a human equivalent, a slight nod, which was apparently correct enough because no one in the audience reacted. She raised both hands open in the ready position that Creamed Combat used as its starting form. She was fast. I could see that from the way she moved. The kind of fast that was not just physical but trained, economical, each movement precise and connected to the next. She had been doing this since she could walk. All were trained in combat from childhood. It was not optional and it was not symbolic. The Kree warrior caste trained the way some cultures breathed continuously and without particular thought until it was simply part of what they were. I put my hands up in the way I had been taught in a room very different from this one by a very different kind of instructor. She came at me. The first thing most people learned when they fought someone significantly better than themselves was surprise. They expected to be tested. They did not expect to immediately understand in the space of a single exchange that the gap between their ability and the other person's was not a step but a wall. She was significantly better than a baseline human fighter. I was not a baseline human fighter. Her first combination was a textbook Velkrith opening form, and I knew it from the briefing documents I had studied in a previous life. And I redirected it the way you redirect water, not by opposing it, but by moving around it. And she recovered faster than I expected. and I filed that away. The crowd made a sound, quiet, interested. I kept my breathing even and my face neutral, and I paid attention to every single thing she did. She was learning, too. I could see it. Every exchange gave her more information about how I moved and how I responded and what I was willing to trade for position. She was intelligent and adaptive, and she had reflexes that most human athletes would have considered superhuman. I spent 4 minutes letting her map me, giving her patterns that were true enough to be convincing, but not complete, letting her feel like she was making progress because she was making progress, just in. Odd as much as she thought. Then she found what she believed was an opening, and she went for it with the full commitment of someone who has been building to a moment and is finally ready to take it. I was not in the position she expected me to be in. I had moved a quarter second earlier than her read suggested I would, and the space she was committing to was empty, and before she could fully adjust, I had turned her own momentum into the thing that ended it. She went down onto one knee. My hand rested gently on the back of her shoulder, the formal shaveth position for the end of a round. The arena was completely silent, not the silence of a crowd that has seen something disappointing, the silence of a crowd that has seen something they did not have a category for and are in the process of creating one. Serraine stayed very still for 3 full seconds. Then she rose slowly and turned to face me. Her expression was the most interesting thing I had seen in 4 years of freight runs. It was not embarrassment. It was not anger. It was the expression of someone who has just had a wall fall down in their mind and is looking at what was on the other side. First round to the human, the attendant called informal Cree. The crowd found its voice, then not applause. A sound like collective recalibration, rustling and murmuring, and the specific quality of whispered conversation that happens when many people are all asking each other the same question. In the upper tier, well back from the front row, a tall Cree officer in a uniform that was different from everyone else's had not moved. He had not reacted to the crowd's sound. He had not looked away from the arena floor. He was looking at me. I did not recognize him from this distance. He recognized me from this distance. I could see it in the way he had gone completely still. Serraine walked back to the center of the floor. She breathed steadily and collected herself with a discipline that I genuinely respected. When she looked at me again, the curiosity in her eyes had become something deeper, something that was asking a very different question than it had been asking before. Second round, she said. The blades. An attendant brought out 2 CRT ceremonial war blades and laid them on a low stand near the edge of the arena, long, slightly curved, with edges that were functional rather than decorative. Another attendant brought a single human combat knife in a plain sheath and held it out to me with the careful expression of someone performing a formal duty that they were not entirely sure about. I took the knife. The crowd looked at the knife, then at the war blades, then at each other. I could hear very faintly the sound of several bets being revised. In the upper tier, the tall Cree officer still had not moved. He was watching me hold the knife, and his expression, even at this distance, was the expression of a person who has just understood something that changes everything. I rolled my grip, settled the weight, and walked back to the center of the floor. I thought, do not let anyone see what you are yet. But the thing about a chaveth was that it was designed to reveal exactly that. Stage by stage, round by round, there was nowhere left to hide. The second the blade came up, everything changed. I do not mean that something dramatic happened. I mean something quieter than that and more complete. In the space between one breath and the next, standing in the center of that arena, with a human combat knife in my hand and a CH warblade crossing the air toward me, something settled into place inside me, like a key turning in a lock that I had spent 4 years pretending was not there. Serraine moved well. I had already established that. But with a blade in her hand, she moved differently, more committed, more fully herself. The way some people are more genuinely present when they are doing the thing they were built for. The warblade was an extension of her body rather than a tool she was using, and the transitions between her forms were so smooth that a less experienced eye might have missed the moments of decision buried inside them. I was not a less experienced eye. I tracked her first cut, stepped inside it, and let it pass close enough to my ribs that I felt the displaced air close enough that she expected it to land. It did not. I moved exactly as far as I needed to move and not a single step more because efficiency was not a style. It was a principle. And the principle was that energy spent unnecessarily was energy that was not available when you actually needed it. She adjusted mid-form with speed that was legitimately impressive. The blade redirected and came back in a line that required me to parry rather than evade. And I parried with the flat of the knife, not the edge, because I was thinking several moves ahead and wanted my edge in a specific position when the moment I was building toward arrived. In the tiered seating, the audience had stopped making noise again, not same silence as before. This was different. This silence had a weight to it, the weight of many people paying very close attention. Between exchanges, she asked me a question. She asked it the way you ask something when you need to know the answer, and do not want to wait for a more convenient moment. Not rude, just direct. Where did you learn to move like that? Fleet training, I said. Fleet training does not produce this. She came at me again. A high-low combination that was designed to force a choice. I did not give her the choice she was designing for. I have fought trained human military combatants before. Demonstration matches. They were competent. You are not competent. Competent is not the right word for what you are. We separated, reset. What word would you use? I asked. She thought about it for one breath while we circled. Inevitable, she said. I looked at her. She meant it precisely. How many battles have you fought? She asked. Not sparring, not training, real engagements. The number that came to mind was not a comfortable number. I had not thought about it in years because thinking about it served no practical purpose, and because the specific weight of each individual instance was something I carried in a different part of my mind than the part I used for arithmetic. Enough. I said that is not an answer. It is an honest one. She came in fast and I let the engagement develop into a close exchange blade to blade because at this range her reach advantage disappeared and mine appeared and she discovered that in the next 3 seconds and had to work to compensate. She did compensate quickly and well, but the working of it told me things and I stored them. What war? She asked because we had circled back to the beginning of the question. You know which war? I said. I know the name of it, she said. I do not know what it felt like to fight it. A pause filled by movement. We were told afterward that the human fleet performed unexpectedly in several engagements, that some officers demonstrated strategic capabilities that exceeded predictions. Predictions are made by people who have not yet seen the thing being predicted. Yes, she pressed a combination that I let work slightly more than it should have because I was watching how she processed partial success. And what I saw told me that she would follow it with something more committed. I was right. I redirected the committed attack and in the space that created I stepped in, controlled her blade arm at the wrist and held it. She stilled. I released her gently and stepped back. The arena made a sound like stone settling. Serraine stood very straight. She looked at her wrist, then at the knife in my hand, then at me. On her face was the expression of a person who has spent their entire life being very good at something and has just met someone who is in a different category entirely and is in the process of realizing that both things can be true at the same time, that she can be excellent and still be outclassed, that the gap exists without anything being wrong with her. I respected that she landed on that understanding rather than a worse one. You took a cut, she said. I looked down. There was a line across my ribs where her blade had found me in the second exchange, the one I had let get close. Not deep, not significant, but present. You're right, I said. Does it hurt? A little. She looked at me with something that was not quite what I expected to see. Not satisfaction, not calculation, something more personal than that. You let it happen. It was not a question. I thought about how to answer it. I was watching something. I said, sometimes you have to give something to see something. That is a choice that the person cutting you does not usually get to share. She said, no, I said they don't. She understood what I meant. I could see it happen. The understanding that the cut was not a mistake, that I had made a deliberate trade, accepted a cost in order to gather information, and that the cost was one I had calculated and found acceptable, that in the whole of the exchange she had made contact exactly once, and it was because I had decided to allow it, not because she had succeeded in spite of me. The attendant called the end of the second round. In the upper tier, the Kree officer had leaned forward just slightly. His hands were on his knees, and his amber eyes were fixed on me with an expression that was no longer simply watchful. It had become something more specific. He was a tall being, broad for a Kree, with the particular bearing of someone who had commanded large numbers of people for a long time. His uniform had markings that if I had been closer I could have read. I was not closer, but I was beginning to have a feeling about him. Serraine walked to the side of the arena where attendants brought water and small recovery items. I stood where I was. She looked at me once over her shoulder, then spoke quietly to one of her attendants who left quickly. W. Henshi came back to the center for the third round. Her expression had settled into something more focused. The social curiosity was still there underneath, but the surface of her had become something different. She was no longer treating this as an interesting exercise. She was treating it as the thing it had always actually been, which was a serious evaluation of a person she was not sure she had correctly understood. The blade attendants took the weapons away. Other attendants brought the simulation materials. In Chavith tradition, the tactical simulation was conducted on a shared holographic field approximately 6 m square that projected a simplified representation of a specified engagement scenario. Both participants commanded designated forces. The parameters were set by mutual agreement governed by the formal rules of the Chavith and overseen by a neutral coordinator. The neutral coordinator this time was an older Surath with the measuring eyes of someone who had seen a great many Chavith and was reserving judgment on this one. "Captain Cole," he said, addressing me formally, "by the rules of the engagement, you will receive 7 vessels of your choosing from the standard Dominion roster. The Lady Serraine will command 32. The theater will be set in open space with 2 gravitational bodies and a debris field. You will have 15 minutes to familiarize yourself with your assets before the simulation begins. 7. I said 7 is standard for an asymmetric challenge when the challenging party significantly outranks the challenged in social standing. He said, which was a very polite way of saying that the expectation was that I was going to lose regardless of numbers. So, the numbers were set to make the result look more dignified. "I'll take 9, I said. 4 cruiserweight vessels and 5 lighter escort class. The coordinator looked at Serraine. She nodded. A small movement watching me. 9 it is. The coordinator said the Lady Serraine will command 40 adjustment for the added 2 vessels, 40 to 9. The audience stirred with the specific energy of people who have placed bets and have done the math on what they are about to watch. The holographic field activated and the scenario loaded around us. And I stood at the edge of it and spent exactly 15 minutes looking at things that other people would not have known to look at. The debris field was in the northeast quadrant of the simulation space. Standard distribution slightly denser in the interior on its own, not particularly significant. The 2 gravitational bodies were arranged in a near-binary configuration, close enough that the space between them had a complex tidal pattern that any ship moving through it would need to actively correct for. That correction would cost time and processing attention. On its own, also not particularly significant. I looked at the relationship between the debris field and the binary configuration, and the approach vectors that a force of 40 vessels would naturally tend toward when engaging a smaller force of 9. There I had the entire thing in my mind by the time the 15 minutes ended. Not a single step of it, all of it at once. The way you understand the shape of a room when the lights come on. The simulation began. Serraine brought her fleet in with the professional efficiency of someone who had studied fleet tactics formally and applied them with intelligence. She did not rush. She did not overcommit. She kept her formation cohesive and used her numerical advantage as a weight that she could bring to bear at any point along a broad front. She was very good. I positioned my 9 vessels in a configuration that looked from the outside like a defensive screen. Tight, covering the most direct approach vectors, suggesting that I intended to make her pay for every meter she advanced. She read it correctly as a defensive posture and began the encirclement that any competent commander would begin. What she did not read was that the defensive screen was not a defense. It was a door. I needed her fleet in a specific place. The encirclement would put them there. Every decision she made in the next 6 minutes was going to be exactly the decision I was planning for. Not because she was making mistakes, but because I was offering her a sequence of choices where every option led to the same location. And the sequence was subtle enough that the destination was not visible until you were already there. She eliminated 2 of my escort ships in the 3rd minute. I let them go. They had done their job, which was to slow her left flank by exactly the amount that kept her central formation from advancing past a specific coordinate until I was ready. In the upper tier, the Kree officer had stood up. He was standing with his hands behind his back, watching the holographic field, and his face had the color of someone whose blood has done something unusual. He had seen this before. Not this simulation, this structure, this specific geometry of sacrifice. And positioning, and the invisible patient engineering of a battlefield that looked like a random engagement until the moment it suddenly completely did not. The attendant who Sarah had sent away earlier returned and leaned in close to him. The officer took the small data pad she offered and looked at it. I saw his expression change from 30 m away. He looked up from the data pad and looked directly at me. At the simulation field, Sarah's 40 ships had completed the encirclement. They held position on 3 sides of my remaining 7, ready for the final advance in exactly the configuration I needed them to be in. I gave the order. My 4 cruiserweight ships opened toward the binary gravitational bodies simultaneously on diverging vectors, and the tidal pattern between the binary bodies. The one that required active correction from any ship moving through, it pulled Serraine's responding ships off axis in slightly different amounts depending on their exact position. Slightly enough. The clean lines of her encirclement became ragged at the exact moment my escort ships executed a coordinated strike through the gap that the raggedness created. It was not a dramatic moment. It never was in real fleet engagements. That was something that simulations and stories both got wrong. The decisive moment in a fleet engagement felt like a calculation resolving, like a lock opening, not like thunder. Her formation fractured. In the following 7 minutes, working through the debris field as a channeling mechanism and using the remaining tidal pattern as a timing device, I reduced her 40 ships to 12 functional vessels. Then I stopped. I did not complete the engagement. I stood at the edge of the holographic field and looked at what was left of her fleet, and I said to the neutral coordinator, "I'm requesting a formal pause." He blinked. "A pause is not a standard element of the I know," I said. "I'm requesting it anyway." He looked at Serraine. She was standing on the other side of the field, looking at what remained of 40 ships, and her expression was something I did not have a clean word for. It was the expression of a person who has just understood something large, not just about a simulation, about something larger than that. She raised one hand and the coordinator nodded. The holographic field froze. The arena was silent in a way that was different from all the previous silences. This one had a quality of suspension to it, as though everyone in the tiered seating was sitting on the same held breath, and no one wanted to be the first to release it. Into that silence from the upper tier came a sound. Footsteps. Single deliberate footsteps descending the tier steps with the unhurried pace of someone who has made a decision and is carrying it out. I turned. The Kree officer came down through the parting crowd. He was tall, broad, wearing a uniform that I could now read clearly, and what I read made something cold and precise settle in my chest. The insignia on his shoulder was the high command rank of a Dominion Fleet Admiral, retired. But the Dominion did not strip ranks. The indicators at his collar marked him as a former theater commander. He walked onto the arena floor. He stopped in front of me. He stood there for one long moment, looking at my face with the expression of a person who is confirming something they already know. Then he said a name. He said it in full. First name, family name, rank, and the battle designation that the Fleet Command had attached to my service record after the war. Commander Ethan Cole, 7th Fleet, the Karath Engagement, the Velshara Corridor. He said all of it clearly in the arena with perfect CRT formality and the weight of genuine recognition. Then he went to one knee. In Cree culture, a High Fleet admiral going to one knee was not a gesture of defeat. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, of specific and formal recognition of a thing that had earned recognition. He had fought at KTH. I knew that from the briefing documents. He had commanded the Dominion forces in the Velshara corridor. He had been there for the entire campaign. On the other side, and he had survived, and afterward he had been one of the 3 Dominion commanders who signed the armistice. He had seen the KTH gambit from inside it. He knew from personal experience exactly what I had just done in that simulation. The arena held its breath. Serraine Velrathan stood very still on the other side of the frozen holographic field, and her amber eyes moved from the kneeling admiral to me, and then back again, and then to me for the last time. Her expression in that moment was one I think I will carry for the rest of my life. Not shock, not humiliation, not the forced recalibration of someone who has been embarrassed. It was wonder, genuine and unguarded. The expression of a person who asked a question expecting one kind of answer and received instead something that rewrote the question entirely. "Tell me your real name," she said, not loudly, Dierk. TLY. The admiral was still on one knee. The arena was still silent. I looked at her across the frozen holographic field with the ghost of 40 ships scattered through it, and I thought about 4 years of freight runs and real coffee and Owen's steady hands and Claire's good sense. And I thought about the 15 years before that and the weight of both and what it meant that I was standing here right now. I said my name, all of it, and the room changed. The thing about a name is that it can be empty or it can be full. The same arrangement of sounds, the same letters in the same order, and it can mean nothing at all, or it can mean so much that the room around you shifts when you say it. I had spent 4 years making my name empty, filling it with freight manifests and maintenance logs and the ordinary weight of ordinary things, until it was just a word that appeared on cargo licenses and trade authority documents and the small plate beside my bunk. When I said it in that arena, it was full again. I could see it in the faces around me. The Cree and the tired seating processed the name the way you process a sound that is familiar in a completely wrong context. The way you feel when you hear a piece of music in a place you did not expect music. A small delay, then a reframing, then something that was not quite the same as the thing before. Admiral Vithal, still on one knee, raised his head and looked at me with the steady clarity of a person who has lived long enough to stop performing his reactions. "I thought you were dead," he said. "I separated from service," I said. "It is not the same thing, though I understand the confusion." He rose not quickly with the deliberate pace of someone who was choosing their movements precisely because they were in a formal setting and intended to honor it. "You did not attend your own commendation ceremony," he said. "No, I was there." He said the Dominion sent a formal observer. I went personally. I wanted to see the face of the man who ran the Kroth Gambit. He paused. "You were not there to be seen." "I know." "Why?" It was the same question Serraine had asked the previous evening in different words. I thought about the same answer and found that it was still the only one I had. "Because the ceremony was about what happened," I said. I already knew what happened. I did not need to stand in a room full of people performing their feelings about it. Vithal looked at me for a long moment. His amber eyes had the depth of someone who had made decisions in war that he also carried in a private place and did not discuss at formal occasions. "What you did at KTH should have been impossible," he said. "We had the numbers and the position, and 3 separate field assessments told us the station could not hold." "The assessments were correct," I said. "The station could not hold for long. It held long enough to break our supply chain and force a corridor withdrawal that cost us 4 systems." Yes, he was quiet for a moment. Around us, the arena had the feeling of a room in which a great many things were being revised simultaneously, and the revision was happening too fast for any single person to track all of it. "I should tell you," Vithal said with something that was not quite apology, but was in the neighborhood of it, "that I authorized the intelligence operation that flagged your registry 4 months ago. Your ship crossed our systems under a shortened name. We ran cross-references. The file that came back was classified, but certain service markers were visible enough to trigger a tier review. He paused. I was informed that a human vessel with military classification indicators was operating in the corridor. I requested a monitoring flag. I did not know it was used specifically until 20 minutes ago. I looked at him. You've been looking for me. Not actively, but when names come up in the corridor, my office is notified. His expression carried something complex in it. I wanted to know what you had become. After the war, after all of it, a freight captain, I said. Yes. He said it simply and without judgment, but with the particular quality that people have when they have been given an answer they were not expecting, and are holding it carefully while they decide where it fits. Afraid captain, Serraine had not moved from her position across the frozen holographic field. She had been listening to the exchange with the total attention of someone who has understood in the last several minutes that she is not in the situation she thought she was in. She had challenged a retired freight captain. She was now standing in a room with a legend, and the legend was standing in a room with a dead simulation of 40 ships. And the man who had scattered those ships was also the man who 15 years ago had done the same thing with real vessels and real lives. I owe you an apology, she said. I looked at her. Why? I invited you here for entertainment. She said it clearly and without flinching. I was curious about humans and I thou. GHT a shaveth would be interesting. I had no idea who you were. She paused. That was not respectful of me. You were honest about your reasons, I said. That is more than most people manage. You accepted the challenge. I could not easily refuse, but you could have refused. She stepped around the edge of the holographic field, moving toward me without the formal arrangement of distance that Cree protocol usually maintained. Closer, talking to me the way you talk to someone, not the way you address them. You could have identified yourself. You could have told me what you were. I would not have, she stopped. I do not know what I would have done. You would have been less curious, I said. The curiosity was honest. That matters. She looked at me steadily. The arena was still very quiet. In the tiered seating, hundreds of CFT were sitting in the posture of people who are watching something they understand to be significant without being entirely certain of all its dimensions. What does it feel like? Asked. What does what feel like being what you are? She said it carefully, not as a challenge and not as reverence, but as a genuine question, carrying what you carry. I know the name of the Cath engagement. I know the strategic outcome. Our historians write about it as a turning point. They discuss formation tactics and supply mathematics and the political consequences. She paused, and they do not write about what it costs, what it felt like to be the person making those decisions. The arena was still. I was quiet for a moment. The thing about questions like that was that there were two kinds of answers, the ones that sounded right and the ones that were true. The ones that sounded right were cleaner and easier to carry home and required less from the person asking them. The ones that were true were jagged and did not resolve neatly and tended to follow you into rooms where you were trying to have a normal conversation. It felt necessary, I said. Every decision felt like the only available decision. The station held because the people defending it chose to stay. I gave them a strategy. They gave it their lives. I looked at her directly. What you do with people like that after is the harder question. What you owe them, whether gratitude covers it, whether any word covers it. She did not say something encouraging or consoling or any of the things that people said when the answer was uncomfortable. She just looked at me, and the looking was enough. You became afraid, Captain, she said. Yes. Because of what you described. Partly I thought about it also because freight captains do not make decisions that cost people their lives. The worst thing that happens when I get it wrong is a late delivery. I find that preferable. Do you miss it? The question landed in a specific place. I had been asked variations of it over the years by Claire and Owen, and a few other people who had managed to piece together enough of my past to make the question worth asking. I had given them all the version of the answer that was clean enough to close the conversation. I looked at Serraine Velrathan, who had challenged me for entertainment, and discovered something she had not planned to discover, and was now asking me the question with the directness of someone who was not going to accept the easy version of the answer. No, I said, I do not miss the decisions. I do not miss the weight of them. A pause. I miss the clarity. When you are in that kind of situation, there is only one thing that matters. All the noise of ordinary life falls away, and there is just the problem and the people beside you and the question of whether you are going to be good enough. I looked at the frozen holographic field. Freight runs are quieter, but they are never entirely clear. Serene was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something I did not expect. "Are you okay?" The question was so simple that I did not immediately know what to do with it. Not in the formal sense, not the way someone asks when they expect a formal answer, the way a person asks when they genuinely want to know. I looked at her. She was watching me with the amber eyes and the escaped strands of dark hair and the expression of someone who has stopped performing curiosity and is simply present. "Most days," I said. She nodded. She seemed to understand that this was a real answer and not a diplomatic one. The neutral coordinator stepped forward, then reclaiming the space of the formal event with the gentle insistence of someone whose job it was to do exactly that. "The Shaveth has completed its 3 rounds," he said. "Per the traditions of the engagement, the results must now be formally declared. The first round was concluded in favor of Captain Cole. The second round was concluded in favor of Captain Cole. The third round was not completed to resolution." He paused. "By the laws of Chaveth, an engagement that completes 3 full rounds without a submission in the third is declared Chavel." He L. At the words sit in the air. Chavel equally matched souls. Around the arena, the Cree and the tiered seating absorbed this with the quality of people receiving news that requires recategorization. Chavel was the highest outcome a Chaveth could produce. It was rarer than any other result by a significant measure. In Cree recorded history, it had been granted fewer than 30 times. It had never been granted to a non-Reth. Serene looked at the coordinator, then at me, then at the tiered seating full of her court and the broader Dominion audience who had come to watch something they expected to find entertaining. Then she did something. She turned to the arena and addressed the assembled Surith formally in the full register of Velkarith noble speech, which was a register I could follow only partially, but well enough to understand the essential shape of what she said. She said that the Chaveth had been completed under its full terms, and that the result was Chavel, and that this result was being declared honestly and without reservation, and that the person standing across from her had fought with complete integrity, and had answered questions she had not known she needed to answer. Then she said something that I caught clearly because she slowed her speech for it, and used simpler register perhaps for my benefit or perhaps for the benefit of the moment itself. She said, "This man is not what I thought humans were." The arena received it. Not applause, not dramatic reaction, the kind of quiet acceptance that a formal Cree audience offered when something had been correctly understood. Vithal, standing to the side of the arena floor, clasped his hands behind his back and looked at me with the steady eyes of a person who has arrived somewhere they have been traveling toward for a long time. I thought about Claire's coffee and Owen's data pad and the grease on the second-best jacket and the quiet reliability of the neutral corridor. I thought about the name the Admiral had said out loud in this arena in front of all these people. It was not quiet anymore. I walked back to the gray wall through the docking corridor alone. The formal officer who had escorted me on previous trips had been sent ahead, and the Dominion cruiser's corridors were quieter than they had been before, as though the vessel itself was processing something. I passed 2 young Cree nobles near a junction who stopped talking when they saw me, and watched me walk past with the particular attentiveness of people who have just recalogued something. I kept moving. The airlock between the vessels hissed when I opened it. That familiar pressure equalization sound that I had heard 1,000 times on 1,000 docking runs. And then I was through, and the gray wall smell met me. Warm metal and recycled air, and the faint background scent of whatever Claire had been cooking for dinner, which from the smell was the grain-protein mix she made when she was thinking hard about something and needed her hands occupied. Owen was at the navigation console when I came onto the bridge. He had stopped pretending to read the data pad. He was just sitting there watching the feed from the external cameras that showed the Dominion cruiser alongside us. And when I came through the door, his expression was the expression of a 23-year-old who has spent the last several hours putting together a picture from fragments and has not entirely come to terms with the picture. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Sir Owen, the communications we monitored." He paused the arena feed. Claire put the external audio through the processing system and another pause. We heard the Admiral. We heard what he said. I know. Owen looked at his hands, then at me. Is it true? I sat down in the captain's chair. Outside the viewport, the Dominion cruiser gleamed against the stars. Yes, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Why didn't you ever say anything? The answer to that was the same answer I had given in different forms to Sarah, to V. Thrall, to myself in various iterations over 4 years of late-night ceiling watching. It did not become simpler for being asked again. Because it was mine to carry, I said, not yours, not Claire's. And because I hired you to navigate a freighter, not to serve under a former fleet commander. Those aren't the same job, Owen said. No, they're not. Claire appeared in the doorway from the galley corridor. She had a dish towel in her hand and the expression of a woman who has been standing in that doorway long enough to have heard most of what was just said. She looked at me for a long moment. The whole court of a Dominion princess knows your real name now, she said. Yes, that is going to travel faster than we can. Yes, I said again. She came the rest of the way into the bridge and sat down in the secondary observer's chair, the one that was technically designated for ship inspection officers, and had a small crack in the left armrest that I had been meaning to find. X for 18 months. She set the dish towel on the console beside her. What happens now? She asked. It was the right question, the clean version of all the questions I had been carrying since the arena. I don't know yet, I said, but I am going to have to make some decisions about the freight run, among other things. She looked at me steadily. Claire Dutton had been the chief mechanic on the Grey Wall since its 2nd year of operation, and before that she had worked on 3 other independent vessels. And before that, she had spent 5 years working in the maintenance yards on the Fen Colony Hub, and she had seen enough of life in various configurations to have developed a specific skill for reading the difference between someone who does not know what they are going to do and someone who already knows and is not ready to say it yet. You already know, she said. I looked out the viewport. There are negotiations happening on the Dominion border. I said they have been stalled for 3 years. The Dominion and the outer colonies have been unable to agree on transit rights for the new expansion lanes that both sides need, but neither side will concede ground on. If those lanes are not opened in the next 18 months, the colony supply chains in 4 systems are going to be under serious strain. Owen was listening very carefully. I know this because the freight problems it causes go through my delivery logs. I said, costs are already rising. Routes are already getting longer. I have been watching it from the freight captain end for 2 years and from the other end. Claire asked. From the other end, the problem is that neither side trusts the other enough to make the first concession. They have been talking past each other in formal diplomatic channels for 3 years because the people doing the talking are diplomats, and diplomats in that situation default to protecting their positions rather than solving the problem. And what would solve it? Owen asked. Someone who has been on both sides of a war with these people and knows where the real edges are. I paused. Someone both sides would actually listen to. The bridge was quiet. Outside, the Dominion cruiser held its position alongside us, huge and white and patient. They contacted you, Claire said. It was not a question. Not yet, but they will. I thought about the look on V. Thrall's face when he went to one knee. The look on Serrane's face when she asked me if I was okay. The specific quality of both of those moments. The way they had felt like a door opening from both directions at once. The Admiral will make the communication within the day, I think. And when he does, I was quiet for a long time outside the viewport. The stars were the same stars they had always been. The neutral corridor was the same stretch of space. The ore manifests in the delivery log were the same manifests they had been. This morning, nothing had changed. Everything had changed. I'm going to accept, I said. Owen let out a breath. Claire was still looking at me. The freight business, she said. You can run it. I looked at her. You have been running it effectively for 2 years. The licenses are transferable. I will stay on as nominal owner if you want the continuity for the trade authority. But you know every route and every station manager and every quirk of the Grey Wall's secondary systems better than I do. She looked at me for a very long moment. The kind of moment that has history in it. Not drama, just the weight of time shared. "How long have you been thinking about this?" she asked. "About 2 hours," I said, seriously. And less seriously, I looked at the viewport. Since the first time the transit penalty forms showed up on my desk. And I thought about the supply chain problem and worked out the solution in 20 minutes and then spent 4 hours writing the formal complaint letter instead because that was what freight captains did. She nodded slowly. "You were always too good at the wrong thing. I was trying to be the right thing." "I know," she said. "I know you were." She picked up the dish towel again, not because she needed it, but because her hands wanted to do something. "Is this what you want?" The question was the same question in a different arrangement. The same one Serene had been asking underneath all the others. "Are you okay? What do you want? Is this the right direction?" I thought about what it had felt like in the arena when the simulation resolved and the 40 ships scattered, and the mathematics of the problem came apart in exactly the way I had planned for. The cold, precise satisfaction of it, the clarity, the terrible, peaceful focus of a mind doing the thing it was shaped to do. I thought about, or manifests. I thought about the 18 months of supply chain crisis that was building quietly in 4 colony systems while the negotiations went nowhere and the transit lanes stayed closed. "It is not exactly what I want," I said. "What I want is the quiet. I have learned to want the quiet. But what I am good at, actually, specifically good at, is the thing that is needed right now. And spending 4 more years hauling ore while the problem gets worse because I preferred the quiet is not a thing I am able to do in good conscience." Owen said quietly, "You knew all of this in the arena." "I suspected most of it in the arena," I said. "The certainty came after." He nodded. He was 23 years old and had never seen combat, and had spent 2 years as my navigator, and knew me the way that people know each other when they share close quarters and long stretches of uneventful travel, which was different from most other ways of knowing someone. He knew my coffee preferences and my sleep schedule, and which maintenance tasks I did myself when I was thinking through a problem. He knew the difference between my ordinary silences and the silences that meant something else. He looked at me now with the expression of someone who had not known everything about the person they were working for and had adjusted the picture significantly in the last several hours and was fine with the adjusted picture. "What can we do?" he asked. "Keep the gray wall running," I said. "Stay on the route. The colonies need the supply runs, and a good crew doing them is not nothing." I paused. "And when I come back, because I intend to come back eventually when this is done, I would like my chair to still be here." Owen looked at the captain's chair. "I'll keep it warm," he said. Claire made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh, but contained both of those things. She stood up from the observer's chair and touched my shoulder once briefly. The way that people who have worked alongside each other for a long time say the things that do not fit into words. Then she went back to the galley to finish whatever she had been making. I sat in the captain's chair and watched the Dominion cruiser through the viewport and thought about the last thing Serene had said to me in the arena after the formal declarations and the silence of the assembled court. She had come to stand beside me at the edge of the holographic field, and she had looked at the frozen simulation, and she had said quietly, "I challenged you for entertainment. I want you to know that I understand the full weight of that now. What I found was not what I was looking for. What I found was something I did not know I needed to see." I had asked her what she meant. "I am going to be in the room where decisions are made," she had said. "That is what it means to bear. The decisions that shape how my people see the galaxy, how they treat the people in it, how they define who is worth taking seriously and who is not." She had looked at me. "I came into this believing that humans were clever but manageable. That is what our histories say. That is what our assessments say. I now know that our histories and our assessments are missing something important." "What are they missing?" "You," she said simply. "People like you. The fact that you exist. The fact that you were standing in this corridor hauling freight, and the only way I know about you is because my censor officer happened to pull a records cross-reference." She paused. "How many others are there? How many humans with classified records are operating in ordinary roles in ordinary places because they chose the quiet?" She looked at me with the sharp focus of someone who has just understood something strategic. That should be the first question in every Dominion intelligence assessment. That it is not. I had not answered her because the answer was something I was not going to give to a CRT princess in her own arena, regardless of how genuine her curiosity was. But sitting in my captain's chair now, watching the stars, I thought about the answer anyway. The answer was enough. The answer was more than anyone has counted. The answer was that the galaxy had a specific and persistent habit of underestimating what humans did with peace, which was not simply rest, which was gather and build and raise children who would grow into people like Owen, who sat at navigation consoles and ran maintenance checks, and quietly became competent at things that would matter later. The Dominion had always been afraid of humanity at war. What they had not fully understood was what humanity was like in the years between wars. It was preparing not deliberately, not as strategy, but in the way that living things prepare by continuing to live and getting better at it. The communication request came through an hour and 40 minutes later. VTHAL, formal flag, Dominion High Command channel, requesting an open communication at my earliest convenience on the subject of the border transit negotiations. I looked at the request for a long moment. Then I opened a different channel. Earth Command Long-Range Relay, the number that I had not used in 15 years and still remembered because some things did not leave you regardless of how hard you tried. The answer came in 40 seconds, which meant someone had been waiting. Greywall, this is Earth Command Relay. Please identify. This is Commander Ethan Cole, I said. 7th Fleet separated. A pause. Tell them I'm coming back. The silence on the other end lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then, Commander Cole, we have been hoping you would say that. Stand by for priority transfer. Owen looked up from his console. He said nothing. He just looked at me with the expression of a young man who has spent 2 years thinking he was working for a freight captain, and is now realizing that the freight captain was always also something else, and that both things were real, and that both things had led to this exact moment. I nodded at him once. He nodded back. Outside, the stars held their positions as they always did, without drama or ceremony. The neutral corridor stretched out in both directions, quiet and vast, and full of the ordinary business of living beings moving through the universe doing what they needed to do. I thought about, or manifests, one last time. Then I let go of them and turned my full attention to what came next. The priority transfer put me through to 3 people simultaneously, which was how I knew they had been expecting the call for longer than 40 seconds. The 3 faces on my split screen were the Deputy Director of the Office of Interstellar Relations, a senior fleet command admiral I had last seen in person 15 years ago at a debrief session that had lasted 6 hours and covered things I still did not discuss in public, and a civilian named Philip Grant, who I recognized from news filings as the chief architect of the current border transit negotiation team. Grant was the one who spoke first. He had a kind of contained energy about him, the type you saw in people who worked on long-form problems and had learned to manage the urgency of slow-moving emergencies. Commander Cole, he said, I want to say before anything else that we are not going to ask you to do anything you do not want to do. Your separation was in good standing and you have no outstanding obligations. This is an invitation, not an order. I know, I said. Say what you need to say. The Admiral, whose name was Lorraine Sharp, and who had never been a person who found it easy to be indirect about things, leaned toward the camera. The negotiations have been in formal session for 3 years, and informal back-channel talks for 5 before that. We have made no meaningful progress. The Dominion delegation keeps returning to the corridor access question, and we keep offering the same concession packages that they keep declining for reasons our analysts cannot fully account for. Your analysts have not fought them, I said. No, she said they have not. The Dominion's corridor access requirements are not primarily about economics. I said the economic argument is what they bring to the table because that is the language of formal negotiation. The actual concern is about face, about what conceding corridor access looks like to the internal audience. A concession that reads as strategic partnership is acceptable. A concession that reads as giving ground reads in their internal political structure, as weakness and weakness in the Velkarth hierarchy has specific consequences for the individuals making the decision. Grant was writing something their internal political dynamics. I spent 2 years studying them before KTH. I spent the year after studying them more carefully to understand what I had been wrong about going in and what were you wrong about. The same thing everyone is wrong about. I thought the hierarchy was about power in the abstract. It is about specific kinds of honor. The distinction matters enormously for what kinds of agreements are possible. The deputy director who had been quiet said, "We need someone who can be in the room when it matters, not advising from a distance present with the kind of credibility that cuts through the diplomatic delay. I understand you have that credibility." She said the event this morning on the Dominion cruiser. We had intelligence on it within 3 hours. The admiral who went to one knee in your arena is one of the 3 Dominion representatives at the border talks. He is also the one whose signature we need on the final framework. I thought about Vithal's face when the admiral looked up at me from the arena floor. He would meet with me. I said he has already communicated through back channels that he would consider it an honor. Sharp said his exact words in formal Cree roughly translate to "the person I have been looking for has appeared." He was looking for me specifically. He was looking for a human who could stand in the same room as a high fleet admiral and have the admiral go to his knee. He did not know that person was you until this morning. She paused, but he knew that person existed. He has been saying in private sessions that the negotiations needed a different kind of human voice. Someone both sides could take seriously. And Serraine Velrathan, I asked a brief pause. Across all 3 screens, the princess, Grant said carefully, has sent a personal communication to our diplomatic office in the last 2 hours. She is requesting to attend the border talks as a formal observer from the Velkar Council. Observers are non-voting, but their presence carries significant informal weight. She wants to watch what happens. I said she wants to watch what you do, Sharp said. And frankly, given that she is 22 years old and going to be in the room where Dominion decisions are made for the next 40 years, having her develop a specific and informed understanding of what humans are like when they are serious seems like a worthwhile investment. I thought about her question in the arena. How many others are there? The question she had not expected to be asking. The question that meant she was already thinking differently about the problem. When are the next talks scheduled? I asked 10 days, Grant said. Neutral station, Corridor 4, standard Dominion Earth diplomatic protocol. I need 7 days to get there from my current position. Grant smiled. Not a large smile, a relieved one. The kind of smile that a person who has been working on an unsolvable problem produces when something shifts. Your current position is in Corridor 3. The Dominion cruiser currently docked with your vessel is heading to Corridor 4 in approximately 4 hours. The Lady Sarah is attending the talks as observer and her vessel is the designated transport. I looked at the stars outside my viewport for a moment. You already worked this out, I said. We were hoping, Grant said. And if I had not called, we would have found another approach, Sharp said in a tone that did not entirely convince me. I was quiet for a moment. The faces on the split screen waited. They were good at waiting. That was part of the job for all of them. I need 2 things, I said. Name them, Sharp said. My crew stays on the gray wall. Claire Dutton takes over the freight operation under my license. Full trade authority backing and no interference. Done. And I attend the talks as an advisor, not as a representative. My name goes on. No formal documents. If anything comes out of this, it comes out under the names of the people who have been doing this for 3 years and deserve the formal record of the result. There was a pause across all 3 screens that had a specific quality to it. The quality of 3 people privately noting something that they would discuss later. Agreed, the deputy director said. Then we have an arrangement, I said. I closed the Earth Command channel and sat in the quiet of the bridge for a moment. Owen was looking at me. He had heard enough. I need to go speak to Serraine Velrathan, I said. And to pack a bag, he nodded. The small one or the larger one this time? He nodded again and stood up and went to pull it from the storage locker at the back of the bridge, which was where I had put it 4 years ago and not moved since. While he was doing that, I went to the galley. Claire was at the counter. The grain protein dish was done and sitting in a covered container for later, and she had started on something else, something with actual vegetables that cost accordingly. She did not look up when I came in. "You called them," she said. "Yes, and they already had a plan. They had a structure," I said. I filled in the last part. She set down the knife she had been using and turned to look at me. Her expression was the expression of a person who has worked alongside someone long enough to know the whole shape of them, the parts that showed and the parts that did not, and is holding all of it in view at once. "You are going to be okay," she said. It was not a question. It was a statement offered as a deliberate act. "Most days," I said, which was the same thing I had said to Serraine and which was still the truest answer I had. She picked the knife up again and turned back to the counter. "I will keep your chair in good condition. I know you will." I went back to my bunk and opened the larger bag and began methodically to pack. The ship's communication system chimed. Dominion Channel personal signal. I opened it at the small screen beside the bunk. Serraine Velrathan appeared on the screen. She was still in the arena clothes, which meant she had come directly from whatever conversations had happened after I left. Her expression was quieter than I had seen it before, more settled. The sharpness was still there, but it was pointed inward now, working on something. "I am told you may be traveling to Corridor 4, she said. "I am. My vessel is going the same direction," she paused. "I would like to offer you transit if you want it. It would be faster than your freight vessel." "I know," I said. "I accept. Thank you," she nodded. A pause. "I should tell you something," she said. "I have communicated with Admiral Velrathan since the Shaveth concluded. He told me that he has attended every formal negotiation session for 3 years and that the problem has always been the same, that the humans and the Dominion are talking to each other from across a gap that neither side fully understands." She paused again. "He said that gap is the part that only exists when both sides have not actually fought each other and survived the fight and continued to live in the same galaxy afterward. He is right." I said he said that you are the only human he has ever met who he would trust to stand in that gap and understand both sides of it. She looked at me directly. "I want you to know that I said the same thing to my own advisors, that I will be saying the same thing in the talks." I thought about what that meant practically. A young Kree princess with 40 years of formal influence ahead of her, building a picture of humanity from what she had seen today. The question she had asked that she had not expected to be asking. "How many others are there?" "Thank you," I said. "I did not do it for you," she said with the directness that I was beginning to recognize as simply the way she spoke. "I did it because it is accurate." "I know," I said. "That is what makes it worth thinking." She looked at me for a moment with something moved across her face that was not quite a smile but was in the direction of one. "You are a very strange human, Ethan Cole. I have been told that before. I mean it as a compliment, I know." I said I took it as one. She ended the channel. I finished packing the bag. I carried it through the gray walls corridors one more time, past the galley and the engineering section and the narrow passage between the cargo hold and the secondary systems room that always smelled faintly of the welding work Claire had done there 18 months ago. I put my hand on the wall of that passage for a moment. "The way you touch a thing you are leaving, not dramatically, just honestly." Then I went to the docking hatch. Owen was there. He had the docking release controls ready and he was standing with his hands in his jacket pockets and the expression of a young man at the beginning of something without knowing it. "You will be fine," I told him. "I know," he said. "I learned from a good teacher." I looked at him. He was 23 years old and had never seen combat and had steady hands on a navigation console and an honest way of looking at the world that was worth more than he knew yet. "That's generous," I said. "It's accurate," he said, using almost exactly the words Serraine had just used, which made me think that perhaps some things were simply true enough to arrive at from any direction. The docking hatch opened. I walked through. On the other side, the formal officer was waiting, but this time he had a different expression. Not the polite blankness of escort duty, something more considered, something that suggested the last several hours had moved through the vessel and left a different quality of attention in their wake. "Commander Cole," he said, and the title in his voice was not the Kree formal designation. It was just the thing I was straightforward, accurate. "Lead the way," I said. He did. The corridors of the Dominion cruiser were the same as before. curving, amber-lit, full of Kroth who had been at the Shaveth and were still carrying it with them. But the way they looked at me now was different. Not fear, not worship, something more specific. Recognition. The recognition of a thing correctly categorized for the first time. I walked through it steadily and without hurrying, the way I had learned to walk through spaces where many eyes were on me. Because hurrying suggested you were escaping something, and I was not escaping anything. I was walking towards something. That was a distinction that mattered. In the navigation suite at the front of the cruiser, the stars ahead were the stars of Corridor 4. And beyond them, the border talks, and beyond those, whatever came after, which I could not see yet, but could feel the shape of the way you can feel the shape of a room before the lights come on. I found the quarters Serraine staff had prepared and set my bag down and sat in the chair beside the small viewport and looked at the stars. The gray wall was behind me now. It would stay in the corridor, running its routes, carrying its ore, keeping the colony supplied, being exactly what it was supposed to be. And I was going to go be what I was supposed to be. I did not feel the way I thought I would feel. I thought I would feel like something had ended, like the quiet 4 years had been closed like a door. Instead, I felt like a particular kind of clarity had returned. The kind that came from things being correctly aligned, from a person doing the thing they were shaped to do, not because someone had told them to or because they had no other choice, but because they had chosen it. And the choosing had been made from a full understanding of what it cost and what it gave. I had wanted the quiet. The quiet had been real and it had been good and it had given me things I needed. But the quiet was not the end of the story. It was the chapter where the story gathered. Itself. Outside the viewport, the stars moved slowly past as the cruiser adjusted heading and the corridor opened ahead and the destination was 10 days away. And I had exactly the time I needed to think through what I was going to say when I got there. I thought I planned the way I had always planned. From the outside in, from the result backward to the first move, holding all of it at once and turning it until the shape was clear. By the time I stopped, the stars had shifted enough that I knew several hours had passed. My dinner was on a tray beside the door, placed there by someone who had not wanted to interrupt whatever I was doing. I ate it quietly. Then I found a piece of paper in my bag, real paper, which I carried because screens had a way of going dark at inconvenient moments, and wrote down the first 3 things I was going to say when I walked into the negotiation room. I looked at them. They were the right things, not perfect. Nothing was perfect at the first attempt, but they were the right shape, and the shape was what mattered to begin with. I folded the paper and put it in my jacket pocket and turned off the light. Outside, the stars were still there. They always were. I went asleep, and for the first time in 4 years, I did not spend any of the time between lying down and sleeping, working very hard not to think about who I had been. I just was who I was. And tomorrow, I would start doing something about